Good morning, everybody. Today, I wanted to talk to you about paladins, both my paladin and the class in general. I decided to take on the challenge of trying to make a paladin that had as many spell points as possible. Now, a lot of people questioned me and said, Strimtom, why would you do that? And I don't really have a great answer. There's a bit of a story behind the inspiration. You see, there was one day where I was messing about with falconry, and I realized, hey, that's weird. You can use falconry to get wisdom to hit and damage on your shield. And it's a very strange thing, because if you play as a Harper agent, you are unable to get intelligence to hit and damage on your shield. When the gnome was first released, I had the idea of playing as a gnome intelligence-based Vanguard because I was just falling in love with Vanguard at that point, and as it turns out, I wasn't able to play it and I had to completely shift gears. So now, 3 years later, having the idea to play some type of alternate stat Vanguard sounded really exciting. I figured Paladin was going to be better than Fighter because they can actually use the wisdom for something, and I thought, hey, since Paladin's mana scales off of wisdom, why don't I try to make a Paladin that's going to get as many spell points as possible? That's how I kind of settled on the idea of Mana Guard Paladin, and we evolved from there. However, a couple caveats came into the mix. The first big problem was that you have to spend quite a few points in the actual Falconer tree to get access to everything you want, and then once you go back into Vanguard, you really don't have any points to spend anywhere else. You don't have enough points to spend in the Sacred Defender tree to get a lot of the defensive stuff, you don't have enough points to spend in the Knight of the Chalice tree to get into the offensive or area of effect stuff, and you don't have nearly as much damage as if you're playing as a Charisma or a Strength Paladin. So even though the idea was a strong idea and it would have been a lot of fun, it stopped being fun during the leveling process because my character was just so far behind in a lot of my Vanguard abilities because I had to spend points going into the wisdom to hit and damage stuff that I just felt like I was unable to kill a lot of monsters while leveling. It was at this point that I decided to drop the Vanguard part of the build and just try to play Mana Paladin and go to dual wield Paladin and focus more on Knight of the Chalice instead. And this is where some of the problems with Paladin starts to arise. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make this kind of like a two-part video. Well, not two parts, it's just coming to you in 2 parts in the video, which is to talk both about the build that I played and also some of the issues I see coming with Paladin and the challenges of trying to use alternate stats to hit and damage. So let's start by talking about the build. Well, dual wield Paladin's actually a lot of fun, and the single target damage is pretty reliable and strong. The area where you kind of slow down is area of effect. See, when there's a single monster, you get extra light damage on hit from the cores in Paladin, you've got the extra damage from Smite Evil. There's a lot of really good burst damage that you can get on Paladin, especially since you have some decent action boosts like action boost damage. Of course, the downside is that you don't get access to action boost haste, which is one of the best single target damage boosts, but you take what you can get since you're playing Paladin. While the single target damage was good, it just really lacked in the area of effect department. I found myself often just swinging at groups of monsters hoping things were going to die, using both of the Paladin cleaves just to be able to try to knock stuff down, and at the end of the day, the big problem that I ran into is that the cleaves don't use your offhand weapon, so they're designed really to be used with a two-handed weapon, and two-handed weapons do so much lower single target damage that it was either use a two-handed weapon to get some cleaves, but then still not be able to kill anything, or I'm going to be using dual wielding and then I'll be able to kill stuff. It's just if there's lots of monsters, I can run into a lot of trouble. And it really kind of starts to exacerbate the problem of Paladin, which is the next thing I want to talk about. You see, Paladin is a very interesting class because it's both offensive and defensive. The righteous Inquisitor who strikes down enemies to get at the answers and for their fate. However, this Righteous Inquisitor also happens to have Lay on Hands and an entire tank tree and even defensive abilities in their offensive tree, Knight of the Chalice, like the ability to, cure people of their diseases, as well as greater restoration when you cure disease, or getting healing amp, or getting immunity to energy drain. There's a lot of things that are in the tree that are inherently defensive, and that's kind of problematic because it means since you have so many more defensive options, you just inherently don't get as many offensive options, like a rogue, or a ranger, or a fighter, or a barbarian, or a bard. Since Knight of the Chalice just isn't a strong enough tree when you compare them to some of the other very strong trees like Kensei or Frenzied Berserker, you kind of always know you're going to be doing a little bit less damage as a Paladin. However, you get really cool defensive tools, and honestly, the damage isn't so bad that it's unplayable. The reason why I say this is because Paladin is the king of elite difficulty. If you're looking to pick up a character that you're going to play all the way through the game on elite difficulty, no further than Paladin. You should go, because Paladin is just a god of elite difficulty. The healing is amazing. You've got lots of spell points to cast healing spells on yourself. The lay on hands, if you play as an Aasimar, you get the healing hands. You can do so many different things, and your damage is more than enough to take down monsters. But just stepping into Reaper 1, you lose 30% of your damage, you can't heal as much, and you're taking more damage. And all of a sudden, Paladin starts to lose a lot of its luster. Lay on hands isn't as strong as healing hands from Aasimar for some reason. Your burst damage doesn't kill monsters anymore. You don't have a fantastic way of dealing with Reapers because Paladin doesn't have any inherent armor penetration like a lot of other classes. So what ends up happening is you run into the core issue of having not enough damage, not enough healing, and not enough defense. You have a little bit of each, which is awesome for elite difficulty, but not enough of any individual one, which is not so great for Reaper mode. Generally, once you get into Reaper mode, you kind of want to specialize and go into one area, you know, like a lot of the Inquisitive players or Sorcerer players, where they just happen to have Use Magic Device, so they go all out offense, and then in between a fight, they'll pop a heal scroll and then keep moving. As a Paladin, a lot of these things aren't really the same option, because if you go all out offense, immediately you're in melee, so you're going to be taking a bunch of damage, and on top of that, you don't have as much physical or magical resistance rating as like a fighter does, or you don't have just the raw temporary hit points of a barbarian, or you don't have the defensive stats and the evasive stats of a rogue, and you just take a ton of additional damage over somebody else. So what ends up happening is you end up playing a character class that's really, really fun for normal, hard, and elite, but then once you step into Reaper mode, it just kind of loses a little bit of its luster. Now, in a party, once you have a Paladin there, the Paladin starts to amp up the party a lot. Spending pretty much any points in the Sacred Defender tree allows you to defend your allies, give out more armor class, give out more saves, be able to lay on hands people, and the healing potential of a Paladin feels really good. Important to note about my character, when I was in a group, it felt awesome. I had so many spell points that I am just spamming heals into everybody. Meta magics, doesn't matter, because I have so many spell points that I don't need, and it allows me to just kind of completely support a party. But when I tried to solo, especially on Reaper mode, that's where I ran into problems. Elite, no issues whatsoever, I cleaned up the game. Reaper mode, it was a lot slower of a process, and it doesn't get helped by the fact that Reaper mode was made harder very recently. Overall, I don't think Paladin is a bad class, but I think there are definitely some changes that could be made to make the Paladin a little bit more fun, especially as regards to Reaper mode, and I think one of my biggest things would be to do some adjustments to the Knight of the Chalice tree. If I was doing some tweaking, I would definitely make a couple changes, like maybe say getting your extra damage to your favorite weapon from the actual Knight of the Chalice tree. So if you decided to use longswords or whatever your favorite weapon is, that would go right in there. Maybe take some of the defensive stuff, like the remove disease effect and other things, and take that out of the tree and instead put that into the Sacred Defender tree. You could even condense a couple of the points, like make it so that the areas where you get plus 20 healing amplification over 3 points, you could just put 2 points in, that's plus 30 healing amp for each one, and then you could also combine the tier 5 plus 30 healing amp with the energy drain immunity, so that way you could fit some more stuff in the tree. Next, I would probably bump up the melee power a little bit that you get in a couple different places. You know, put one into the core number 5, put a little bit more into the core number 6, the capstone, and also I would make it so that the light damage was probably a bigger progression, more like the Eldritch Knight. So you know how Eldritch Knight gets a D6 every 3 levels, and then it goes up to a D8, a D10, and a D12? I would do pretty much that exact same progression, so you get a D6 light damage, you know, every 3 levels as a Knight of the Chalice Paladin. And then from there, it scales upwards, and you can kind of have a character that's doing 7 D12s that scales with your melee power every time you strike a monster, which isn't amazing, but it is kind of cool. This is going to be a little bit of a tangent, but I was talking on stream about this, and I kind of had a bit of a brainwave that I discussed with a lot of people that were watching at the time, which is there's a part of me that would love to see the Paladin, the Knight of the Chalice, get kind of turned into more of a hybridized character, that instead of having everything scaling off of melee power to make Paladin slightly different, to instead make it so that Paladin scales actually off of light spell power for a lot of their abilities. Throw some light spell power into the Paladin Smite, make the auto attacks scaling at the bottom of the tree scale off of light spell power instead, and make them Eldritch Knight-esque in their actual damage structure, so that way they can scale a lot harder and avoid a lot of damage reduction. Keep the melee power where it is, but then also add a new ability at the top of the tree that's an extra big hit that does additional light damage that scales off your spell power. Maybe maybe add a couple new Paladin spells, give them, you know, Divine Retribution or, Divine Punishment, and a couple other light-based spells in their Paladin tree, especially considering how few Paladin spells they actually get, and give them a way to scale off of the light spell power, so they both use melee power for their melee damage, and then light spell power for their added light damage. And since light damage pretty much penetrates everything, like there's nothing that light damage can't really get around, it means that Paladins have a lot of really good options to be able to get a lot of extra damage in that goes above and beyond what other classes are doing. Because I feel like if you just say, all right, Paladin, we're going to add plus 10, 15, 20 to hit and damage or something, and 20 more melee power, then you're going to be like, cool, Paladin tree is better than Kensai now, so why would I play Fighter? Because I could just play Paladin, Knight of the Chalice, and I get Kensai, but also so many amazing things. And I think that I wouldn't want to see that happen. I'd want to see some type of separation. Do I think that they should go spell power route? Probably not, but I think it'd be kind of neat. Anyway, the last thing I want to touch on here is the idea of making a character that uses the wisdom to hit and damage, just because I thought that would be kind of neat out of the falconry tree. So I've done a lot of these characters where I use wisdom to hit and damage from falconry, intelligence to hit and damage from harper, or charisma to hit and damage from whatever source. So trying to change your damage type. Especially after playing a bunch of falconers, one thing I can say is that I find it's not always the best option. I really enjoy playing characters like falconers because I think that the falconry abilities are very cool and unique. I really enjoy the playstyle of the different characters, but at the end of the day, I think that it is a lot to ask to put so many points into a tree. It's 12 points just to get the change to wisdom to hit and damage, and then it's 23 points to get the kind of know the angles-esque ability, and I think wisdom to hit and damage is just a little bit too expensive. So in a lot of cases, if you're unsure if you should scale something off of wisdom, make sure you're really, really sure, because it's taking, to get it scaling really well, over a quarter of your enhancement points, and so please make sure you're considering exactly how you're going to make your character work, because there's a lot of different options there when it comes to using wisdom to hit and damage. And I think that even though it can be really cool, a fighter or a rogue or a barbarian suddenly using wisdom to hit and damage, you lose so many other stats. So while I do appreciate falconry, the fact that it's difficult to get assassinate DCs as you get closer to the end game, and the fact that a lot of the wisdom items aren't really the things you want to scale the best. Weirdly enough, it's actually easier to get intelligence items to fit into your build at endgame. I've recently been making a ton of different character builds. Wisdom has just been much harder to gear out than intelligence, strength, or dexterity. So I recommend you focus on those things and just consider, if you're going to make an alternate stat damage character, there's a lot of a risk associated here, and this character, if I was to redo it as just a strength-based or charisma-based Knight of the Chalice, I would be seeing a lot more success. Anyway, guys, I'm going to hand it over to me to go through the build. So how do you build this type of wisdom paladin? I'll show you. Start out, make sure you got some wisdom. I chose Azamar for this character build because Azamar is very focused on wisdom, getting bonus wisdom as well as the Azamar healing hands. And then you gotta be lawful good, so we go with just pure paladin. Now, as far as the wisdom score, I started with a 20. This character definitely performs a little bit better than probably some other different types of paladin builds, but for the most part, you're going to be getting more bang out of your buck from just playing as a pure strength or charisma paladin. So like I said, if you're looking for something that's going to be the best paladin experience, don't try this. But for the wisdom paladin purposes, start with a max of 25 wisdom, and the rest of your stats just come through. This character, I didn't really need any strength, but I did need dexterity for getting all of the different feats, because I did take 2-weapon fighting. So you need 2-weapon fighting, improved, and greater 2-weapon fighting, which has a minimum 17 dexterity requirement. I have tome, so I don't have to worry about it too much. A little bit of con. I think, I left my int at an 8, and I started with a 14 charisma. Favorite souls, or not favorite souls, Azamar actually do have the ability to get additional charisma by taking the Protector Bond, although I did not take the Protector Bond on this character. As far as skills go, concentration, intimidate, use magic device, a lot of this is pretty self-explanatory. UMD is just for using wands of shield. Intimidate is for intimidating stuff when I get near bad enemies. And then concentration, because you need to be able to cast your spells in combat. This character does not currently have quicken. As far as feats go, I went to take the 2-weapon fighting feats, so taking them as early as possible. I did take them at level 1, so it'd be easy to play with during the leveling process. I also took Precision and Knight's Training and improved critical slashing. And Precision is just good for getting critical strikes against monsters that are immune, and then Knight's Training because I'm using dual-wield longswords on this character. My deity, I decided to go with the Sovereign Host because I get the bonuses to longswords. If you want to make this character in a different way, you could actually take Blood of Vol and then take all the same stuff, but instead of using Knight of the Chalice tree, take all your points and put them inside of the Vistanian Knight Fighter tree. You'll probably get a character that does more damage and is more self-sufficient because I'm so sorry, Paladin. That's just the way these things go. As far as the individual spells, for the most part, I use Divine Favor And then I took some of the healing spells like the cures so I can cure myself and my allies. The cures are really useful since I've got a lot of spell points on this character. 1,357 at level 20, which is surprising for a paladin. So it's really good for me. And then most of the level 2 and 3 spells have almost no bearing on your character. It's once you hit level 4 spells, that's when you want to take Holy Sword first, and then Zeal second. It's one of the reasons why you see Paladin builds that are 15 Paladin, 4 Ranger, 15 Paladin, 5 Ranger. The 15 Paladin gives you access to both Zeal and Holy Sword, and the 5 Ranger gives you access to the tier 5 of the Tempest Ranger tree. Now, when we go to the enhancements, I decided to split my enhancements up this way. So we've got points in the Aasimar tree. These are the least important things. I would say while leveling, you want to put points into the cores here, but it's not quite as important as some of the other stuff that you get out of the tree. So the cores are much more important than the other stuff you get out of the tree. Getting the extra healing hands, being able to heal yourself, heal your allies, especially since you're wisdom focused. And then we went to Knight of Chalice and Falconry. Falconry is the bread and butter. It's going to give you your wisdom to hit and damage. It also gives you some crowd control that you kind of need on a character like this. Paladins have unfortunately no built-in forms of crowd control outside of the stunning shield from Vanguard. So you kind of need ways to knock down or defend yourself against enemies. They also don't get the tactics bonus of fighters, so trip and stun effects aren't nearly as powerful. So Falconry does help out a lot here during the leveling process, although getting your Falconry attacks to land can be quite difficult. So the way in which I put the points in this character, I went for Falconry first, making sure I got wisdom to hit and damage. And then I pretty much just put all my points back into Knight of the Chalice, leveling on my cores when they were available. And then once I had everything in Knight of the Chalice, I then put points back in the Aasimar tree and then the Falconry tree. Couple important things to note. During the leveling process, I did use Exalted Cleave and Avenging Cleave because having the ability to hit multiple targets at the same time makes your leveling process a lot easier and a lot faster. Although once I hit level 20, I had other effects that allowed me to cleave monsters from the Epic Destinies that I will get to in just a second here. But most importantly, during the leveling process, it was good to have cleaves. So always consider what you can take now and then how you can respec those things for later for the future. Because there are going to be a lot of situations where you might be like, oh, I don't want to use it at endgame, so I'm not going to take this ability. But it's so useful while leveling that you can just respec your tree. I mean, what do you need 16,000 or 16,000 plat for? Just respec it later and take the abilities you like. Important abilities out of this tree, of course, Exalted Smite is very, very powerful, giving a huge damage multiplier to your Smite Evil. And then this one up here, the Holy Retribution. Holy Retribution is a charisma scaling ability that kills monsters if they are less than 1,000 health and are also evil, which is really cool. However, once you get about level 16 or so on the quest list, most monsters are going to have over 1,000 health, so you won't be instantly killing monsters. It's just a good cleave, though. Really short cooldown, hitting lots of monsters in front of you. It's a double hit, which is cool, and also recharges you one use of your Exalted Smite. So you're essentially going to be on bosses, Smite, then Holy Retribution, then Smite, then Holy Retribution to get that damage back and to be able to power up your character. Now, when it comes to how do you spend your points, obviously I have 90 points spent here. If you're going to take 10 out of this tree, what you're going to do is you're probably going to chop down a whole bunch of things. You're going to chop down a bunch of stuff out of Falconry. You kind of just want to get Deadly Instincts. That's 23 points in here, so you save yourself 7 points already. And then you're probably just going to shave some points out of the Aasimar tree, saving some points. If anything, you could probably take a lot of points out of Aasimar and just go with the 7 from the cores and maybe just grab the 1 healing amp here, which would be a total of 9 points in Aasimar. And then you'd only need to shave 1 point out of Falconry, probably taking something like getting rid of this Wisdom point here, or taking 1 point out of No Mercy, because you don't really need some of those other points. Now, once we progress past that and we go to the Epic Destinies, this is where the character gets kind of interesting. I learned a couple things about the Divine Crusader, and thing number one is that Divine Crusader does not grant a lot of melee power, so you're going to be very heavily relying on this effect right here of the Zeal of the Righteous to actually get your damage off in combat, while just generally playing and questing, unlike something like Legendary Dreadnought, where you have a lot of melee power from Blitz, or any of the other Epic Destinies like Grandmaster of Flowers, or Fate Singer, or Shadow Dancer. Those abilities instead, or those Epic Destinies, grant a whole bunch of melee power off the start. Divine Crusader gets weird effects all the time. So you get like Aura of Purification, you get like No Remorse, this weird stuff, and then 3 melee power each level. So you get some extra health, you get some extra spell points, but you don't really get a lot of the oomph and the right upfront hit. My character right now is sitting at a calm and cool 57 melee power, but if I just touch Fate Singer, I just click Make Active, all of a sudden my character is going to be kicking it around probably 100 and so. Let's say 100. Yeah, 99 melee power. So I get so much extra base damage by just being in Fate Singer versus Divine Crusader. which is kind of weird. Divine Crusader is definitely on the lower end of melee power. You do get some melee power back through things like Celestial Champion, which gives you melee power every time you critically strike a target for up to 10, which is really nice, but it doesn't kind of bridge that gap. The important things about Divine Crusader is you get some cool abilities. Number one, an ability I've never used before, and I just used it, Stand and Be Judged. This is a 30-second stun that causes helplessness, that scales off of your stunning bonuses, can be used at range. I don't know if it has an actual range. It may not. I didn't test the range on it. And it works on Reapers. So this ability seems crazy. If you're playing any type of Wisdom character that has some amount of mana, I would recommend potentially twisting this, because it essentially locks a monster completely out of a fight. You're playing on Reaper mode, Reaper 10, and you don't want to deal with a monster, just stand and be judged, and then the monster is doing nothing and not affecting your allies. So consider this a decently good pickup out of this tree. It's kind of nice. I would, if I was to change one thing out of the tree, I would probably go with, instead of 3 points in Consecration, only go with 2 and put an extra Wisdom in here. But the basic gist is we want extra turns, and we want extra Purge the Wicked, so we get this extra damage here when you critically strike. You want the Consecration because you get Crusade, which gives you extra damage while you're standing in your own Consecration. This stuff gives you melee power, and then of course up at the top here is one of the reasons why you go mana Paladin in the first place, Celestial Bombardment. So the Celestial Bombardment basically has has 3 attacks that causes a knockdown, does 3d6 fire damage per character level, and then it's split into 3 hits. And then that scales with fire spell power. So this effect, I don't know if it works entirely. It does about 300 damage for me when I was using it with my fire spell power of a whopping 30, so that's probably about right, about 300 damage. If you had like 800 fire spell power, it would probably be a little bit different. You're hitting a lot harder. It can also critically strike, so keep that in mind. The knockdown does seem fairly reliable, and it's about 6 seconds on the knockdown, so it's hard to consider whether this is actually a good or a bad ability. And then, of course, the really powerful stuff, Wrath of the Divine for plus 10 to hit and damage, and then Strike Down, which is just an attack, which is a decently long cooldown, but it scales really well off your melee power, giving you a lot of additional damage. So that's kind of how I would build this character. If I was to change it or make any adjustments to it, I probably wouldn't play Wisdom. That's number one. But if you're set on Wisdom Paladin, you want to build this for yourself, the biggest adjustment I would make is probably take all your points out of Knight of the Chalice, this 42 over here, go over to Vistani Knife Fighter, put your 42 in there instead, which is going to give you a lot more damage. I mean, Knife Master getting all this attack speed, getting really powerful abilities like Blessed Blades, or even Miststalker 5, and then instead transition your character into a dual-wield Vistani Knife Fighter Paladin as opposed to the Unyielding Sovereignty. Anyways, that's going to be the end of this video, so thank you guys for watching. Hope you had a fantastic time. Hit that sub button. Don't forget to toggle those little notifications, and, I don't know, watch more videos that I do every day. That's it. Thank you for watching. There we go. Bam, recorded. Easy. That's how we do that.